they won't sign a player unless they're 100% convinced that they have the traits to make this team better. I don't think he was anybody that was obviously on the market right now, but I guess because of that, it's complicated in terms of his club situation. But Chelsea's approach is pretty bizarre at the moment in terms of how they are going through this transfer window. We've seen obviously player power has its place in the game these days, but it can't really overpower the sense of worth that a club wants from their strongest asset, basically.
Let's start with Man United. The reports coming out sort of Saturday evening about Weghorst potentially coming into United. Do you think that one is going to happen?
I really like the idea of it. I think that the fact that they're looking at a player here who brings something completely different to their front line in terms of stature and playing profile is really interesting in terms of a proposal. I don't think he was anybody that was obviously on the market right now, but I guess because of that, it's complicated in terms of his club situation. It's only really going to happen if Besiktas find a way to let it truly benefit them. They're going to need an inconvenience fee, I think, to let this go through. But it is actually really interesting because it looks like Besiktas are actively starting to look for a replacement already. I think we should take it pretty seriously.
Ten Hag's been speaking recently about personality, hasn't he? How important that is. Is that another reason why you think the Weghorst deal might happen? Because he is someone that does have sort of that personality, isn't he?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that we've seen before that United are open to certain types of profile and fits. And again, to just touch on the fact that they looked at Arnautovic at that moment in time, United felt that he would have brought something to the squad, which they didn't have. And I think that that's what we have to look for. It's not just about big names anymore at Man United. In past years, United would have just thrown money at Joao Felix, handed him the number 7 shirt, thought, right, this is it. This will do us for now. This will appease the fans. This will look like we're making a big move to get United back where they should be. And I hope for the best. But this is a new pathway now towards success. And it is a more considered approach.
Do you think the Weghorst deal would potentially sort of end any interest in Joao Felix?
Yeah, I think at a different time and a different scenario, Joao Felix could have fitted in. They've obviously had a look at it and seen that the numbers at the moment don't add up. I think that Ten Hag knows what he's working with here now. He knows that there will be big funds to come in the summer, but for right now, United have to try and get through this window with a low budget and see if they can get themselves through. And as part of that, they don't want to be expending extortionate amounts on a loan fee. They certainly don't want to be spending big on a transfer that's permanent. Yeah, Joao Felix looks like it's going to be one that passes by.
Do you think there's any part of United that would be tempted to sell, your Maguire, your Wan-Bissakas, if it then was able to boost their striker funding?
I don't think that would be good enough reasoning to lose either of those two players. Both right now have to fight for their place in the squad, but losing Maguire or Wan-Bissaka and using the cash for a forward isn't really going to be the solution here, because all it'll do is impact the squad depth in another way, and they'll be short in the centre of defence or short at right back in terms of backups for what they've got right now. So I don't really see that as being a reason to lose either of those players. Obviously, look, Maguire and the Aston Villa links, he's not going to be joining them this month. The story always seemed a little speculative. And for right now, it's not going to happen. I think if we look towards the summer, it's reasonable to expect that Harry Maguire might become available. But right now, especially he's still a really important figure behind the scenes, as a leader. It obviously goes unseen because we don't see what he's giving the team in the dressing room at the training ground. But I'm told that he remains really important in terms of the setup of the squad as a whole. And you have to be careful to manage those situations too.
Obviously, if United do get Weghorst in or another attacker, would you then expect Elanga to go out on loan? A lot of rumours with Everton at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the Elanga situation was always going to be one that would crop up, and I think it might even drag on towards the back end of this window. I think they would let him go if a good enough opportunity for him came along. I think that United would need to be sure that he was going to progress as part of the move, and I think Elanga would obviously need to make sure that he's a good fit for wherever he goes to. And I think in that sense, the Everton thing is slightly tricky to deal with at the moment because of the uncertainty around the manager, where they're going to be in the league, what style of football they're going to be playing. So I think that that's one issue that they're going to have to try and iron out first.
A little bit of talk about interesting Kudus as well. Is that maybe a player that they're looking at ahead of the summer?
I mean, the Kudus links keep coming back. It fits a lot of the boxes that are going to be ticked along the way. It's important to bear in mind that this was a player that Ten Hag already admired coming into Man United, and he was one of the names discussed very early on. And as part of that, we've seen that Hakpo was obviously one of those players too. And United's recruitment staff that were already in place, obviously in the hierarchy too, I've been really impressed with the fact that some of the names that Ten Hag put to them from almost day one have done very well so far in this season. And Kudus is a player now, obviously attracting attention from other clubs too. So it's definitely one to look out for the summer.
Yeah, and does Axel Disasi sort of come under a similar sort of umbrella as well, do you think?
Maybe, yeah. I think, if we already know that Maguire and Lindelof may not have a long-term future at United. So with that in mind, someone like Disasi might be more in line with the long-term vision at Man United. And that's probably why that one's starting to crop up.
And it's finally interesting reports over the weekend that maybe they might look to introduce a £200,000 a week wage cap. How do you think some of the current players would react to that?
Well, I like the principle of setting the wage cap. And I think if you look at what's happened so far since Ten Hag's come in, and the players have all kind of got in line with any rules that he's set in place. Look at the Rashford one the other day, for example, oversleeping, left out of the team, didn't seem to have a problem with it. Maybe it comes under that same umbrella. Maybe everybody has to get in line and understand the way that Man United is going to be run for the foreseeable future. But while I do like the principle of this wage cap, if they still want to sign players at the very elite level, I'm not sure how this is going to add up. I mean, a few months ago, there were stories, maybe even briefings, that United wanted to look at Mbappe. I mean, Kylian Mbappe is going to be out of reach if you're setting a wage cap of £200,000 a week. So for now, I think it's fine to have this outlook. But as soon as United start becoming successful again, this is going to have to be lifted.
Let's move on to Arsenal. Obviously, we know that Mudryk ideally wants this move to Arsenal, don't we? But do you expect them to be successful, or do you think Arsenal might end up losing patience?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen obviously player power has its place in the game these days, but it can't really overpower the sense of worth that a club wants from their strongest asset, basically. At the moment, he's stuck. He's stuck at Shakhtar while they wait to see how much money they can actually get for him. And that's not really helping Arsenal right now. I think that Arsenal, as much as they want the player, are having to look around and consider seriously what they could do if they don't end up signing him.
Yeah, I guess one of the other players they might look at is Joao Felix. Do you think ideally they'd want to get that deal done before they sort out Mudryk in terms of maybe sort of negotiations with Shakhtar?
I don't think necessarily. I mean, if the Mudryk deal suddenly could open up in the next couple of days, then Arsenal would just go ahead and do that deal. So it's not a case of one before the other. And Joao Felix obviously is always the backup plan here because Mudryk has been so clearly profiled as the player that they want through the door. But if they can adjust this Joao Felix fee, if they can find a way to get him in on loan, then I think it's something that has to be considered right now. You're in a moment when you're going for the league title, and a player like Joao Felix is undoubtedly going to have moments in the rest of this season when he can influence big games, even some of the smaller games, and actually come up with match winners, come up with moments that decide fixtures. And that's why he holds that special value. And that's why Atletico know that he holds that value. I don't think that they're like desperate to get rid of Joao Felix. Obviously, like things haven't gone that well, but even comments in the past couple of days from people high up at Atletico suggest that like it's not definitely over for him there. He played at the weekend. But yeah, I think that if Arsenal want to look at an alternative to Mudryk, you're not really going to find anything better than Joao Felix in terms of pedigree.
Yeah, and just again on him, reports over the weekend suggested maybe sort of a £10 million loan fee plus a £70 million obligation to buy. Do you think that's the sort of deal that Arsenal might go for?
I just don't see why Arsenal would go for a 70 million obligation over this player right now at a time when they're already trying to do a deal over Mudryk for a similar fee. It just doesn't make sense that they're going to agree to pay £70 million for Joao Felix, who they don't necessarily want long term, when they could be putting that money into a deal for Mudryk, who they've decided they definitely want. It would also put them in a situation that could cause problems further down the line with Joao Felix if he doesn't fit into the Arsenal setup in the next few months.
Yeah, it's been interesting to talk about maybe Arsenal joining the race with Declan Rice as well. Do we think there's much truth in that? And if we do get to the end of the season, Chelsea have missed out on top four and Arsenal have won the title. Does that make a difference to maybe what Declan Rice would choose to do you think?
I mean, in this exact moment, I'm not really going to play up the Declan Rice to Arsenal rumour because there's nothing in it at the moment. It's an idea, I think, that's been mooted, but I don't think it's gone any further than that. At the moment, Declan Rice is at West Ham. He's committed to getting through this season. And then we'll have to see what he decides. I do think we should bear in mind from an Arsenal point of view that they are considering their own midfield situation and ensuring that they're strong enough in that area, first of all, to get through this season and then, of course, to strengthen in the summer. So it's not impossible that they go for Declan Rice. And of course, they'll be in a really strong position if they were to win the league. Chelsea have been the front runners for a long time, really, to sign Declan Rice. But without Champions League football, without the same pool that they would have had for most of the time that they've been linked with him, it does start to make things look different. The other thing I would say on Declan Rice, though, people keep doubting whether he would move outside of London. Like, I am assured that that's not really a barrier for him. He would consider moving elsewhere within England to make a transfer happen. So again, I wouldn't totally rule out the likes of Liverpool, Man United, maybe even Man City coming in for him in the summer.
Yeah. Moving on to Chelsea, obviously a team that does need reinforcements, aren't they? Marcus Thuram seems to be the player probably being talked about the most. Do you think there's much in that one?
I think there's something in it, yeah. But there are complications in terms of how and when they could actually convince Gladbach to go ahead with a deal like this. So look, Chelsea's approach is pretty bizarre at the moment in terms of how they are going through this transfer window. I thought this window would be a bit more carefully considered than the last one. Hasn't totally been. I mean, they obviously started it by going after Badiashile, suddenly coming for Mudryk. There's been the Enzo Fernández thing, which might still come back onto the table. Moisés Caicedo in the background. They're still potentially looking at a right back too in this window. And now we're hearing about Marcus Thuram too. So this is like a real scattergun approach, because on one side of things, you've got carefully profiled players that they feel fit the bill that we've seen signing for the club. But then at the same time, you're seeing players out of nowhere land on their lap and they're tempted to do it. It's just not going to add up to like a stable environment or a stable setup going forward.
Yeah, you mentioned Enzo Fernandez there. Do you expect them to sort of reignite those talks, or are they maybe more focused on Mudryk at the moment?
I mean, considering like how much optimism they had over the Enzo Fernandez deal, I would be surprised if they didn't revisit it one more time this month just to see if they could make anything happen. They were so hopeful over that being done, and obviously there's so much being made at the moment over the whole basically that they've got in midfield. I mean, it's a huge flaw in their makeup at the moment for Chelsea, and we know that with Kante and Kovacic and Jorginho that like the long-term future of Chelsea's midfield isn't entirely certain. So Enzo Fernandez is probably somebody that's going to come back onto the radar, but at the same time, they are in talks with other players like Mudryk. So there's a lot to address.
You mentioned about Chelsea and Moisés Caicedo. Do you think Liverpool are sort of in this race as well, or showing interest?
I mean, it's a tough one because the Liverpool end of this story seems pretty intent that nothing is going on directly. Obviously, it's very much in the interest of either Caicedo or the people around him to want this move, to play up the chances of this deal, because obviously really good things could happen from there. So of course you're going to get gossip around it that intensifies as the window goes on. And the only reason to really believe it could happen is because of the fact that Liverpool do pull deals out of the blue. They pull things out of a hat. So we shouldn't rule it out, especially given the fact that there is a clear need for something to happen in that midfield.
Obviously, they've been linked with Koopmeiners as well. We've already seen maybe Van Dijk help convince Gakpo to move to Liverpool. Could he do the same with Koopmeiners, do you think?
I mean, it's a nice idea for sure. I mean, he's a brilliant player. I'm not sure he would be any better, say, than an Amrabat figure coming in, because I think both players have different qualities that they would benefit from. But again, like Liverpool were really capable of anything in this window. It might be that it amounts to nothing, but at the same time, I feel like anything and everything could be available to them.
Yeah. Obviously, Gvardiol's come out and said that Liverpool would be his dream club. Given sort of Van Dijk's issues, maybe his form not being where it was, do you think they could potentially join the race for him in the summer?
I mean, maybe they can become contenders. I mean, I think we should probably consider that it's in Gvardiol's interest right now to build up all the hype around him to make sure that there's a tussle to sign him. So I think from a club standpoint, then they'll be happy for that to be the case with Gvardiol at the moment while he stays where he is. But at the same time, the player obviously wants to make sure that his next move is a big one. Ultimately, he knows he's going to be elevated in the summer no matter where he ends up going, whether it's Chelsea, Tottenham, Liverpool. It's all going to be about that raising profile now and making sure that he's in the conversation for big things.
I know we've spoken before about Oxlade-Chamberlain and Keïta, but 6 months left on their contract. The last window they could go for money. Are there still sort of doubts over their futures, do you think, this month?
Honestly, I think it's going to depend on how the squad's looking by the final days of the window. At the moment, they can't really afford to lose any more depth. So I would imagine they stay. But again, like, this is kind of a fluid situation at the moment, it feels. And if Liverpool do manage to get somebody else through the door, it could change.
Yeah, you mentioned Gvardiol on Tottenham a minute ago. Can they be serious contenders to sign him in the summer, do you think?
Potentially. I mean, we need to see how this season plays out first, see whether Conte stays in charge, see whether Paratici's still pulling the strings and can make something like this happen. It's always been the case that Tottenham have had an interest in him. Chelsea have dominated conversations, I would say, up until recently, and it's always felt that they will have an edge when it comes to completing the signing. But given right now that Chelsea's status isn't quite where it was, given the fact that Tottenham will still believe that, they can somehow end this season on a high, I think that they've got to consider that they would have a good opportunity in the summer, or at least a good opportunity as Chelsea do right now.
Yeah. Going on to Newcastle, a lot of talk that maybe signing a number 6 is a priority this month. But again, lots of talk about Tielemans as well. Do you see him as being a key target this month?
I mean, in terms of like that position particularly, I'm not sure that a central midfielder is the priority, because I don't think that's the case. Mainly because I know they still want a forward. So I'd say I'd put the two hand in hand, really. They want both of those positions filled. I think what it's really important to understand here is that Newcastle are not going to panic buy. So even though they do really want both of those positions filled, they won't sign a player unless they're 100% convinced that they have the traits to make this team better. Look, somebody like Tielemans might well come under that umbrella and he might be someone they pursue. But ultimately, if they go for Tielemans, they're suddenly going to have to compete with Arsenal, who are top of the league and probably in a stronger position to actually sign him if they want to. So there's a lot to weigh out there. But ultimately, I think the central midfielder and the forward are both situations that Newcastle are still looking to address.